You know I am a fan of comics, and you also, of course, know that I love economics, and Bryan Caplan and Zach Weinersmith have come together to bring those two things together. They've just released Open Borders. I'm going to talk a little bit about it in this video, but overall, I want to talk about how to make comic books using economics. Not just how to make them, but how to learn about economics through comic books. Hi, I'm Craig and welcome to Market Power, where we look at the power of markets and economics to shape our world. And we've already talked about a few ways that economics have shaped the comic book world. This is the third video in a series of videos about economics and comic books. The first video was about how economics have shaped the market for rare comic books. And I also did a video on how economics shaped how Marvel and DC competed in the early days and how they formed a secret cartel. In this video, I'm going to talk about 3 ways we can use comic books to learn about economics. And the first way is just these stories within comic books. Now, I did a review on a book about this. It's called Why Superman Doesn't Take Over the World. I'll put a link to that video up here in the card, and also there will be links in the description. And that book goes through and talks about how superheroes reflect economics and the decisions that they're making. But not all comic books are about superheroes. And a lot of times they'll be about just normal stories that can also show economic principles. So one comic book I've just been reading lately is Mouse. It's a story about Art Spiegelman, who interviews his father, who was in Auschwitz and had to live through the Holocaust. It is a powerful book, and one of the things that stood out to me were the times that markets came through and helped his father make it through this horrible time. Like, even in the concentration camps, he was able to use markets to improve his situation, which is amazing when you think about how markets just empower us and give us freedom even in some of the most austere conditions and the worst conditions of humanity. Markets can come through and help us out. So I learned about economics by reading Mouse, and we can learn those kind of things as we read other stories as well. I know we want to know how to make comic books using economics. That's my third point, but let me stop at my second point and talk about more about how to learn economics through comic books, and that is choosing comic books about economics. Now, there aren't that many out there. I mentioned Open Borders with Bryan Caplan and Zach Weinersmith at the beginning. This is about the economics of immigration, and it does a great job. Let me also point out the cartoon introduction to economics. There are a couple versions of this. There's a microeconomics and there's macroeconomics. This is by Yoram Bowman. He's a comedian. He's the stand-up economist, and it's an interesting textbook. I mean, is textbook the right word for this? It's like a textbook, but it's to introduce you to the concepts of economics. So what a great way to start learning about economics. Let's go back to Open Borders though, because this is the new one. This is going through the arguments for why we should have more immigration. Not just more immigration, of course, it's just open borders. And I really like this book. It's beautifully done. And the points that they're making, I think it works surprisingly well for a comic book. Another nice thing about looking at a book like this is often when I finish a big book with an argument like this, I want to go back and reread it, but it can be a big investment to go back and reread it. Comic books are not that way. It's very easy to reread the comic books, and it's very easy to go back and say, okay, what were the arguments he was making, and then go through it. And another really nice thing about this, speaking of rereading it, is that it can be hard to go back and find the arguments you're interested in when you're going through the text. But here with the pictures, you have a very nice visual reference. Like, oh, okay, he was talking about Niagara Falls economics. Let me just, easily found it right there. That makes it super easy to get the things that you're interested in learning about and go find those arguments specifically rather than trying to just dig through that book and learn it. So I think this is doing a great job of teaching economics through this format. And you know, I'm a little jealous. I wish that I had done one like this. Maybe one day I'll get to be able to do this. It would really legitimately be a dream come true to have my own comic book, especially about economics. I guess I just need to find what the topic's gonna be and who the artist would be too. So my third point on how to learn economics using comic books is to look at how we make them. And we use economics to make these comic books. Now, I have talked about Mouse, I've talked about the economics ones. Let me show you one of my favorite series of comic books, and that is Runaways. I was a young teenager when the Runaways series came out. It's now a Hulu series. I haven't seen the Hulu series. I think we're getting Hulu when Disney Plus comes out, so maybe I'll watch it then, but I really like the comic books. I think they're innovative, I think they're interesting, I think they're really beautifully done. The visuals are really interesting. Now let's compare Mouse versus Open Borders and Runaways and look at the art inside of them, and you can see some pretty big differences. The art in Mouse is very minimalistic. The art in Open Borders is, you know, more detailed, but also it doesn't have as much depth. But then you look at Runaways and it has a lot of dynamic art in it. And it's got lots of depth, it's got a lot of emotional range. And so we see three very different styles of comic books here. And what we learn from this is actually something about the division of labor. So Mouse was made by Art Spiegelman himself. He did all of the comic book, including the writing, the lettering, the art, like everything was done by a single person. Open Borders was done by Brian Kaplan and Zach Weinersmith, and then Zach did the art, and the colors were actually done by Mary Cagle. But then you look at Runaways, and Runaways has an entire team behind it. And that's because the labor has been divided and specialized across all these different people. And that is what allows them to produce this beautiful comic book, and not only this beautiful comic book, but many comic books regularly. Some of the specialization here is so amazing you might not even realize it. So there's a penciler and an inker, and those are different things. Inkers, so the penciler, you know, they do the pencils and they give kind of basically the rough draft of what this is gonna look like, and then the inker comes through and gives that drawing life before it gets the color. So a great example of this comes from Inkwell, which is an organization that recognizes inkers, and they did a contest where David Finch, one of my favorite comic book artists, did the pencils, and then they let different people ink it, and you can see how this ink makes a big difference in how this image comes across. Because inking can make such a big difference, that's a specialization. Specific people work on inking. And because we can specialize down to that amount, we get more comic books and we get better comic books because the division of labor, specialization, creates, you know, better, valuable comic books. It is amazing to see how these comic books embody economics, and I love it. And I just hope that it's something that other people get excited about. I've got some other videos that you should watch next, like when I opened up a box of rare comic books and we found some really valuable ones, and also the explanation of how Marvel and DC were in a secret cartel. Make sure you subscribe and click on these videos, and we will see you in the next video on Market Power.